Brad Pitt's character, Detective Mills. All right, so let's start off simple. What did you see? You meaning collective here, so I don't want to pimp any one person. What did you see?
I had like a very short fuse, so it was very much on time for a detective, and for his character had to calm down at the time.
So very short fuse, impulsivity, low frustration tolerance, clinical terms usually used to describe such scenarios. Detective Somerset requiring what we would call de-escalation, talking down, reorientation, reframing. Again, all psychotherapeutic terms. Yep. Anything else with regard to that in terms of these character flaws? Any further observations?
I guess it's kind of similar to our discussion this morning with George and Stanza. I feel like they had a little bit of a similar personality, so I guess you could consider something like intermittent explosive disorder.
Yep. So I think when we see this intermittent explosiveness, the idea of intermittent explosive disorder must be entertained, which automatically means that you must entertain any mental disorder that itself may be characteristic of intermittent and explosive behavior. Does Mills provide any additional evidence, clues as to what primary disorder may exist here? I mean, do you think he demonstrates an elevated, expansive, or irritable mood? So if your answer is yes, this group has to consider a manic episode. And if you consider a manic episode, we must also consider bipolar 1 disorder.
I didn't feel like it was that irritable.
Okay.
I would push for bipolar type 2, okay? Because it doesn't. I'm not gonna say it impedes work because it kind of does. It kind of doesn't. Like he's still focused on his job. He still knows what he wants to do. It's just that Somerset kind of understands that there's a better way to handle this if we're calm, and he just tries to de-escalate most of the time. So I'm very for type 2, but at the same time, I still don't see any elevated moods.
Well, let's talk about type 2, because what differentiates type 1 bipolar from type 2 is what differentiates mania from hypomania. Unfortunately, in as much as we're analyzing this film, we still have to adhere to the basic and cardinal trait of an elevated, expansive, or irritable mood, because both, or I should say that cardinal trait would be manifest in both bipolar 1 as well as bipolar 2. The only thing that really differentiates hypomania from mania, and therefore bipolar 2 from bipolar 1, is the duration of that, right? The 1 week cutoff. 1 week or more, we're going to call it mania. Less than a week, we're going to call it hypomania, so the 1 week cutoff. As well as its impact with regard to, in this case, Mills's functioning. If it's clinically significant, we're going to call it mania. And if it isn't, we call it hypomania. But as far as the actual signs and symptoms, including the cardinal sign, they're the same. So if we don't think that Mills is demonstrating an elevated, expansive, or irritable mood, and we don't think that this is mania, then we're probably not going to think this is hypomania either. So is this group, is this consensus okay with regard to determining that there really isn't an elevated, expansive, or irritable mood? We're okay with that. Any other? In the absence of that, is there anything that you did see that caused you concern or interest? pertaining to a potential diagnosable mental disorder.
In males?
I think it was a little bit because I know even prior to him coming into the city, you know, he has this sense of like he's there to fix all the wrongs, and so it's sort of like this. I don't want to call it an ego. I don't know if that's like that, but he has this sense of like he can fix things, and you know, even when Somerset wants to redirect him and kind of redirect his career and tells him, I don't think this should be your first assignment, he goes, oh, you know, you don't know where I'm coming from and things like that.
So a need to fix things. Would it be okay if we call that grandiosity?
I would say so. I thought it was grandiose, but yeah.
So we have grandiosity identified in Detective Hill's. Grandiosity is a diagnostic criterion of mania, but without that cardinal trait, it doesn't matter. Can't be mania without that cardinal trait. So might the grandiosity be due to another mental disorder?
Delusion?
Do you think, so delusional disorder is a differential, yes. Do you think that Detective Mills demonstrates a fixed belief that does not have any basis in reality? The answer is yes, we're on to something.
I mean, he thinks that he can fix that he thinks that he can fix the city's ills, but he can't.
He does. Now, we have to determine whether or not that's a fixed belief, if that's a delusion, or if it's just unbridled enthusiasm in a rookie, or not a rookie, but certainly a young detective. I think he just made detective, so he's he's new to this.
I think it's just enthusiasm for his craft.
Again, I don't know if there's any really right answer. This is speculation from both sides at this point. But I think we should leave that in a differential just to be comprehensive here. Although maybe lower the differential because we really do have to attribute it to normal behavior until proven otherwise. Right? Again, it's a clinical pearl. Doesn't matter what or how your patient presents. Your mindset should be all of behavior is normal, giving your patient the benefit of the doubt until proven otherwise. Now, the proof otherwise can be, but I still want your brain to be trained like that, giving your patient autonomy and the benefit of the doubt. All right? So that's where we are. So let's call it enthusiasm until proven otherwise.
And for the grandiosity, it could also be for narcissism, but I wouldn't call him narcissistic because he obviously has empathy for other people. I think in narcissism, you don't have empathy for other people. So.
Now the narcissistic personality disorder is one of those personality disorders that is readily defined by a cardinal trait. There are some that aren't. There are some
for admiration. The need for admiration.
It's really the arrogance and haughtiness of believing they're special, and that they can only be understood by somebody as special as them.
I think John Doe is a narcissist.
I do. Yeah, we're going to get there, but yeah, I do. But do we also believe that Mills is? So maybe not. So maybe some narcissistic traits, but it does not appear to be true narcissistic personality disorder. Now, again, just to go on a little bit of a tangent, today we're going to actually review some personality disorders. And we usually teach them, we usually learn them in 3 groups or clusters. And we're going to do nothing real different today. You will learn the different clusters. That said, there's a way of rearranging things that makes this, I think, even easier to understand. Right? We're going to go through those steps. That's the whole reason why we're meeting today. Part of that will be for you to recategorize into 2 columns. One, that list of personality disorders that do adhere to a cardinal trait and those that do not. Because the majority do. And once you understand that cardinal trait, there's no reason to memorize the actual DSM criteria for your test. All you gotta do is convince yourself that those criteria are nothing but examples of that cardinal trait, and then you'll never miss them on an exam. Okay? So just a test-taking pearl. Okay? More to come. Anything else about Mills? So we're working him up for narcissistic personality, perhaps narcissistic traits. Mania is lower in a differential. Delusional disorder, lower in a differential. Anything else? The fact that we're leaving this conversation now, maybe refocusing on another character next, without a definitive comfort level with regard to most likely diagnosis, brings us right back to the original thought. Maybe this actually is intermittent explosive disorder, since its explosiveness does not appear to be due to a larger condition, at least not one that we feel comfortable with today. So it might actually be intermittent explosive disorder after all. But you can see how we got there, right? All right. Any other characters here worthy of analysis?
Somerset is kind of schizoid. He's like a loner type. He had since his like remote relationship, he's just kind of like dove into his work and like tries not to be close to anyone else.
Mm-hmm. And you brought up a good point, which reminds us that there, I believe, are 5 or 6 things we have to review now that are part of every evaluation of every potential personality disorder. So irrespective of those cardinal features, irrespective of the specific DSM criteria, for every single one of the personality disorders, there are about 5 or 6 things that the clinician must always address. What are they? What makes a personality disorder in general?
When they're deviant from like their culture, kind of like deviation from like a cultural norm, I would say.
So let's just rephrase it a little bit and say that it causes clinically significant distress or impairment. We'll count that one.
It's not related to or attributable to something like a more serious mental illness.
2, not due to another mental disorder. Good.
And not due to substances, I guess.
Good. Not due to the physiologic or direct physiologic effect of a substance.
Has to be persistent.
Good. It's going to persist over time, just like our personalities do. When our personalities get crystallized,
So persist over time from what age?
well, we're going to say, depends on who you talk to, but we're going to say certainly by late adolescence, early adulthood. Two more. We mentioned it can't be due to the physiologic effect of a medical condition, right? And then there's one more. Not only must it persist over time, but at any one point in time, it must also be pervasive. That is, it should across multiple settings. Right? I mean, if I act like a weenie today at work, but my family will tell you that when I'm home, I'm the most pleasant person in the world, you're probably not going to say, you know, this is a personality disorder. It just may be my work face. So it's gotta be pervasive too. So stable and pervasive. There's your sense. These have to apply to every single personality disorder.
You said it has to cause distress.
Yes. Yeah. Just like any other mental disorder, with the exception of 2. It must cause, that's C-A-L-L, I'm sorry, C-A-U-S-C, it actually must cause clinically significant distress or impairment. By the way, which 2, by definition, don't? We already named one, hypomania. What's the other one? mild neurocognitive disorder, separates from major neurocognitive disorder, the condition previously known as dementia, and that it is not clinically significant where major neurocognitive disorder is. Those are the two. So for schizoid personality, do these apply to Somerset? Because you said that it was incident to his having broken up with his wife, separated from his wife. And we wouldn't expect him to be this jovial Mr. Wonderful up until his wife leaving him, and then, quote unquote, turning schizoid. That doesn't happen. Now, of course, we don't know the real answer. Now, the little bit that we get from Somerset, it does look like it's incident to the breakup of his marriage. But certainly the clinician has to delve here. And we need to know the prequel. Of course, it doesn't exist. Don't look up the prequel. But that's where we would go with this. And if in fact we saw that, yeah, no, he was a loner before his separation, then yes, then this is more consistent with a schizoid personality disorder. Tangent. Schizoid personality disorder is one of 3 cluster A personality disorders. The other 2 are what? Good. Right. Forget that. To talk about them as part of a personality disorders lecture or discussion is to just confuse the issue. Instead, talk about them in the context of schizophrenia. Right? Individual presents with new onset psychosis. Individual is 18 to 25 years of age. Higher differential is schizophrenia. You end the psychiatric evaluation with schizophrenia being your provisional diagnosis. Patient, their family, speak with you and say, God, what caused this? Now, in your mind, I'm not sure. Well, no, you'll say this. The cause is always biopsychosocial. You can definitely relate some biological determinants of this behavior. You could also talk about some social determinants of this behavior. But when you talk about the psychological factors that contributed to the new onset psychosis, there are 3 that you are going to definitely mention. Schizoid, schizotypal, and paranoid personalities all pose independent risk for developing schizophrenia and other psychotic disorders. And it's in that context that you should remember the cluster A personalities. Because once you do, you've eliminated 3 from the personality disorders lecture, which makes them much easier to remember. Right now, if I ask you to name all the personality disorders, name them, walk out of this room, honors for your psychiatry clerkship. Miss 1, and you're going to repeat your 3rd year. Who takes that challenge right now? And the reason why nobody raised their hand has nothing to do with anyone in this room who is currently seated. It has everything to do with the way you were taught those disorders. Those disorders just defy memory retention, right? Now, I'm not picking anybody in particular because I know that yours truly gave that lecture in neuron, brain, and behavior back in your M2. So if there's someone to blame, you're looking at them, which is why I'm going to now, I think, make amends. You watched Se7en. Who here can name you the 7 deadly sins? Right? I'll give you an hour. Can you name them? You name them all? You're out of here. Honors. Would you take the challenge now? Or the fair question would you be more inclined to take that challenge? If you have to take one, which one would you take?
7 deadly.
That's the consensus I hear in medical students all the time. 7 deadly sins. Well, the good news here is that with the 7 personality disorders that are left, clusters B and C, they link quite nicely. to the 7 deadly sins. So the fact of the matter is that if you can name me the 7 deadly sins, you can name me the 7 remaining personality disorders once you admit that the cluster A personalities are not true personality disorders per se, but otherwise prodromes of schizophrenia. Right? Gluttony is first. And that's exactly why David Fincher had gluttony the first murder in his movie. It's not true, really, but we like to believe that. Gluttony is the gateway to the murders of John Doe. And there's some parallel here, and that parallel, I think, is best exemplified through the parable of John of Beverly. Who here knows about John of Beverly? So John of Beverly is, of all things, a schizoid personality. He's a hermit, keeps to himself, and one day he is visited by God. And God tells John that he must choose among 3 deadly sins. You must either become wrath, lust, or gluttony. If put in the same situation, I'm going to go left to right. Everybody in the room is going to have to answer, so I'm not picking on any one person. Which would you choose?
I'll be gluttony.
Gluttony.
Is that right? Greed or gluttony?
Lust or gluttony? You want to greed. You can't have greed.
Okay, so then, yeah, wrath is cool.
That's cool.
Yeah, I'd probably go with that.
Another wrath.
Gluttony.
Gluttony.
Last?
Lust.
Wrath.
Wrath.
Rat.
Wrath. All right? I'm not going to ask you this. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot one of them. Sorry.
Gluttony.
Gluttony. He chooses gluttony. John has this idea that he's in big trouble. But if he chooses gluttony, harm is going to come to himself. Whereas if he chooses either of the other 2, he's more likely to do harm to others. So I prefer to harm myself than others, gluttony. So those of you who pick gluttony, very altruistic of you. John becomes gluttonous. He eats too much and he drinks too much. One day he comes home drunk and intoxicated, he crawls into his sister's bed and he begins to rape her. Hearing the screams, his father runs in the room and in a fit of rage, he kills his father. So from gluttony, we get lust and wrath. Gluttony is considered to be the most dangerous of the 7 deadly sins. It is the most severe form of the 7 deadly sins. And from gluttony, all the other sins emerge. Gluttony is the gateway sin. Gluttony in 7 is the gateway murder, and matches up real nice. Anybody here go to Catholic school? Because now I will pick on somebody.
I grew up Catholic. Yeah.
All right, so usually I pick on people who go to Catholic school because it's a tough question. So I'm going to actually answer.
Sunday school.
Many people, I'll answer the question myself. Many people believe gluttony is the overindulgence in things like food and drink. And that's not quite right. That's a byproduct of gluttony. So it's the way gluttony manifests. Kind of like eating disorder. Eating disorder has nothing to do with eating. Maladaptive eating habits and behaviors is the way the disorder manifests in clinical practice. Right? In the same way, gluttony is about turning your back on what or who is important. And when you turn your back on what is important, what you face is what is unimportant, right? Overindulgence. What is the psychological equivalent to gluttony then? When you turn your back on people who are important. You don't take them into account.
Antisocial.
Antisocial is a severe outcome of that, as is narcissism. But the clinical term used by psychologists is egocentrism. Egocentrism is the incapacity to see a situation from another's perspective. It's gluttony. It's the true form of gluttony. So, in the same way then that gluttony is a gateway sin for the other 6 deadly sins, so too is egocentrism the gateway of the cluster B personality disorders. And with that, we can now talk about what those personality disorders are by just reciting the other 6 deadly sins. Right? We're going to leave sloth to last, but give me the other 5, one by one.
I think lust is histrionic.
So lust, histrionic is antisocial personality disorder. Okay? When individuals have a condition known as antisocial personality, in more severe forms, they can be clinically termed a psychopath. Okay? Psychopathy is considered to be a severe form of antisocial personality. And psychopaths can actually commit a series of murders, serial murders, also referred to as lust murders. Hence, that is part of the forensics vocabulary, lust murders. So lust is part of antisocial personality, albeit in its most severe form. Give me another personality disorder.
Wrath? Oh.
I'm sorry. I meant deadly sin. Thanks for reading my mind. Wrath or anger. Anger is actually a DSM criteria of a personality disorder. Which one is it?
Boredom?
You look at the DSM. Anger is actually the listed criteria. A deadly sin is actually a listed criteria of borderline personality. Good. 3 more.
Greed?
Greed. What personality disorder links to greed? Histrionic? Nope. I'll give you the DSM criteria. Greed-like displays a frugal or miserly spending style. It's actually right there in the DSM. That's the obsessive compulsive personality. Demonstrates a frugal or miserly spending style. Greed. 2 more. Envy. Envy is actually listed as a diagnostic criterion in the DSM for what personality disorder. Is envious of others, or believes others are envious of him. It's right there in the diagnostic criteria of the narcissistic personality disorder. I think the one we missed was pride, which is histrionic personality disorder. That brings us to the 7th and final deadly sin is sloth. But we have 2 personality disorders, both in cluster C remaining. And that's perfectly fine because there are actually 2 forms of sloth in the literature. One is called acedia. A-C-E-D-I-A, acedia. Acedia is a form of sloth in which the individual has the attitude of, I don't want to be bothered. I don't want to be bothered. That's the avoidant personality disorder. The other form of sloth is tristidia. Tristidia. Tristidia is more of, why bother? Why bother? It's only going to happen anyway. Or it's not going to help, right? That's a form of learned helplessness. That's the dependent personality disorder. Individuals who really have a need for affirmation and reassurance of their every next step. Tristidia. So the 2 forms of sloth, acedia, avoidant, tristidia, dependent. Greed, obsessive compulsive personality. Antisocial, lust. Narcissistic envy. Borderline anger or wrath. Histrionic pride. And then gluttony serves as the gateway to all of the above. Bringing us right back to the first murder. 7. Let's talk about John Doe. What do you think? We already talked about his having severe narcissism. I think you're right on target there. Certainly believes he's special and can only be understood by someone as special as he is.
I think it also exemplifies a little bit of the like splitting behavior, where he thinks people are either all good or all bad. And I think that goes in line with borderline personality disorder.
Yeah. He does split. All good or all bad. He plays God, heaven or hell. It's one or the other. No purgatory here. Anything else?
Just antisocial.
We got to say it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we mentioned before, along with the narcissist, antisocial does adhere to a cardinal trait. And I think John Doe definitely demonstrates that cardinal trait of blatant disregard for and violation of others' rights. And he might even be a psychopath. Right? He might have the most severe form of this, certainly a serial killer. So, narcissistic, antisocial, borderline traits. Well, take a peek at his childhood. Anything else?
Obsessive compulsive.
Yeah, very meticulous.
Doesn't leave any trace, has everything planned out.
Well over a year with gluttony, right? At this time.
Yeah.
Very, very meticulous. That might be one of the most important observations when it comes to this character. And the obsessive compulsive personality traits that is demonstrated here in John Doe, I think, overcomes the trait of impulsivity that defines antisocial personality disorder. I mean, he doesn't have impulsivity. Despite that, he is absolutely antisocial, right? But absent the impulsivity, and then impulsivity is replaced with obsessive compulsive personality traits. And that's important to know here, right? And that's one thing that certainly poses risk, if you will, of developing into a psychopath with the meticulous way and premeditated nature that these individuals plan. And in this case, I mean, albeit in Hollywood, painstaking. And that's something to remember too, because as soon as you recognize that, you then will recognize that this movie has a fatal flaw. We're going to get to that in a little bit. But let's talk a little bit more about John Doe first. What other observations do you have?
I forget if you mentioned that a higher being was telling him to do this. So would that be like schizotypal or schizophrenic sort of actions?
So, what would be your differential then? Schizophrenia, schizoaffective might be another of the differential here. What? Sorry.
I was saying like a delusion.
Yeah. This is a great prompt to discuss a differential diagnosis within the psychotic disorder spectrum, specifically the chapter of schizophrenia and other psychotic disorders. In this case, the other psychotic disorders will include schizoaffective and delusional disorder. Schizophrenia and schizoaffective adhere to 4+1, that is 4 positive symptoms as well as negative symptoms for definition and ruling. The positive symptoms, the symptoms that are the pathological presence of something that should not be there, include hallucinations, delusions, disorganized thinking or speech, disorganized behavior, and then the negative symptoms, any one of which that are characterized by the pathological absence of something that should be there. And the same criteria, the same 5 criteria pertain to schizoaffective disorder as well. John Doe does not look disorganized to me. So John Doe does not appear to have schizophrenia or schizoaffective. However, When an individual has a delusion that is not attributable to schizophrenia or schizoaffective, delusional disorder has to be higher differential. Individuals with delusional disorder suffer from a clinically significant delusion, but no other signs indicative of schizophrenia or schizoaffective. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing here. What are the 5 subtypes of delusional disorder, otherwise referred to as the 5 themes of delusion we take?
One is planting thoughts into your mind. Someone else is thinking.
That would be a persecutory delusion. And that is called thought insertion, a specific example of a delusion of persecution.
Is that the same thing as delusion of control?
Delusion of control, I'm not familiar with the term.
I think it's also like someone's inserting thoughts into your head. I'm not sure if I just made that
Thought
up.
insertion, thought broadcasting is another example where people can read your thoughts. All are delusions of persecution. The other themes include JPEGs, jealous, erotomanic, grandiose, and somatic. Those are the different themes, with John Doe very likely to be demonstrating the grandiose type. So, is this grandiosity coming from a narcissistic perspective, or is it a delusional perspective? That question is best answered by a clinician asking John Doe if he truly believes he is doing the work of God. And if he indicates that his belief is rigid and fixed, then we're going to call it a delusion, and then we're going to call his condition a delusional disorder, specifically grandiose type. But if he demonstrates some insight, and he looks like he can withstand that rigidity, we're probably going to say that it's grandiosity due to a narcissistic personality. Your gut. And I think Mills does a little bit of our dirty work for us in terms of prompting this conversation with John Doe. Which do you think he's telling us? Just as your medical opinion. Do you think it's fixed and rigid, or do you think there's insight?
No, I think it's narcissistic.
You think there's insight?
Yeah.
Yeah. Could be. No, the clinical.
You talked about the conversation in the car on the way to the box.
Yeah. The teaching. So we're going to go. We're going to leave delusional disorder lower in the differential end. The narcissistic personality is there anyway. And what we'll conclude then as a treatment team is that his grandiosity appears to be due to his baseline narcissistic personality at this time. Now, we got to be careful because even though the DSM has very separate chapters, and we're discussing this as distinctly separate diagnoses, in real life, that's not necessarily true. Because one day, he can appear to demonstrate some insight and therefore result in our attributing this to a personality disorder. But on another day, we might come in and talk to him, and he might actually demonstrate zero insight and think, you know what, he's delusional today. So there's a continuum here. So it's really not categorized one or the other. There's a little bit of a gray area. Right? This gray area is often referred to by clinicians as stress-induced psychosis. Right? Where stress may result in the evolution from one to the other. Stress-induced psychosis. Any other observations with regard to John Doe? Any other characters you like to discuss other than he, Somerset, or Mills?
I think Tracy, the wife, a differential could be
So I think what we have to consider here is the differential between an adjustment disorder with depressed mood versus major depressive disorder. My hunch is that this is major depression. Right? What does Tracy tell us that might allow us to conclude that this is MDD, that these symptoms predated her mood? I don't know if it's a true single line in the dialogue or script, but what do you think she's telling us? It would seem to me that she's unhappy in her marriage. I just can't buy into this idea that all of this started incident to her move. I think the move is just another example of what this husband is doing to his wife. He didn't listen to her. He didn't even ask for her opinion with regard to the move. And again, if this does turn out to be the first time he's ever done that, okay. But as a clinician, I have to consider that this is probably not the first time he has dismissed her as his partner. So I think that the signs and symptoms that Tracy demonstrates is likely to predate the actual move. This does not appear to be a straightforward adjustment disorder. I think if we establish time frames and ask SIGI caps, we're probably going to get the evidence of SIGI caps prior to their move. And I think that is supported by the idea that when she finds out she is pregnant, she knows that the only person she trusts, and happens to be a person she knows for 48 hours, not her husband. Again, I can't see an adjustment having that level of severity where you prefer to tell a very intimate part of you to a stranger that isn't a psychiatrist in an office setting. So a lot going on there pertaining to this marriage. So MDD is highly differential diagnosis here. Now, it can be further exacerbated by the move, so you could have both diagnoses. All right, before we end here, what's the fatal flaw in this movie? Big mistake.
I feel like Tracy, there were 7 murders, but one of them was, 7 bodies, but one of them was Tracy, and I don't think she was any of the sins.
Yeah, I think if you ask John Doe, she was just needed collateral.
Like, I guess technically he didn't commit all 7.
Right. Mm-hmm. I was going to give David Fincher the benefit of the doubt there. My gut is that John Doe would just be, she's just an innocent bystander who was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Is it because he considers, he calls himself envy, but if he's narcissistic, then he wouldn't be envy?
No, they're definitely accurate there. Fincher may have glanced at the DSM for that one, because that one's definitely evidence-based. Envy is literally a diagnostic criteria in the definition of the narcissistic personality disorder. It's right on there.
Are you saying a flaw in the way that we're diagnosing, or a flaw in the movie?
Not a movie. This is David Fincher. This is on Fincher's shoulders here. You mentioned it before with regard to reviewing the traits of John Doe, right? Everybody here is okay with the idea that this gentleman is antisocial personality, right? Pretty blatant disregard for others. And we also know that impulsivity is part of antisocial personality, but I think we made a valid argument / discussion as to his being obsessive compulsive personality, and certainly more than compensating for that impulsivity that we would expect from the antisocial, right? Failure to plan ahead is the DSM criteria, or impulsivity. This guy does not have a failure to plan ahead. This guy planned ahead more than any character in any movie that I know. So, co-occurring OCPD. And if we're okay with that, I certainly am, there's a problem with this movie. If John Doe came to that police precinct and you as the PD psychiatrist, and congratulations on all of you guys choosing psychiatry as a career, you're there. Might you tell the lieutenant, the captain, something with regard to your initial or provisional thoughts that this may not be your guy? Why in the world would John Doe, who we know spent more than a year on his first victim, leave everything, I mean, his divine plan, everything in the hands of someone, Detective Mills, that he knows less than a week? Would he take that chance? Because that's not somebody who's OCPD then. And we're not wrong, he's OCPD. What about that? So the captain says, wait, stop everything. Yells at everybody. We got to give the mic to our doc here. Doc has something to say. You're on. How awesome would the ending of this movie have been? You got something to say, Doc? What is it? You admit you're wrong? He doesn't have obsessive-compulsive personality? I wouldn't. Are we wrong that, no, he's antisocial and you know what, he's got clinically significant impulsivity. He would definitely put his life's plan, his opus, in the hands of someone he knows less than a week. Hardly. What are you saying, Doc? Anyone? Anyone?
Knew him before.
You had known before. You can't see the prequel. But he had to have known him before. Had to. And by the way, if you listen closely, I think Mills tells us that that in fact is true. What part of Mills' dialogue supports this?
When he's in the car, it was raining, he's telling that we're reviewing the back. He's like, you know, my first shot, like I shot someone. Can't remember his name. He doesn't remember his name.
Exactly right. Mills was manipulated, was tested, make sure that he could pull the trigger when John Doe needed him to. Yep. Stalking him. Which again shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, this guy's pretty meticulous in what he does. That's not a surprise. Unfortunately, your theory itself has a flaw. And that is while there could have been things that that John Doe did to ensure that he would get transferred from his current place of work, there's no guarantee that he would be transferred to the police precinct where the murders were already ongoing. Right? Because, I mean, Glutty's been dead for a while, and Mills has just returned or arrived in the city. So, how do we rationalize that?
Like Gluttony was dead before Mills came, but the thing is, I don't know, if John found out Mills showed up, and it's not just by chance or fate, just by being, that's why he decided to just carry out the other murders as quickly and not plan those out as well as he did with his first one.
It could be. It could be just by chance.
Yeah.
But then again, the vast odds are that he is going to go to a city other than the one that Joe has been planning these murders. And if Mills did end up in New Brunswick instead, he would have been like, oh, shucks, I can't do this then.
Am I just remembering, didn't he want to get transferred to that city? To that department?
So he's in cahoots with like the PD, the person that hired him?
He must know somebody on the inside to ensure that the transfer would be made to the very city that he was conducting those murders. Is there anybody in this film that demonstrates being an inside man? Anybody who does things off the book, behind closed doors?
The library again?
Could be the FBI guy. I mean, we see him for, I think, 7 seconds. Unscripted character. I think we need to bring him in for questioning. Anybody else? Who's the library guy meet with? Somerset. Now we know why he's retiring. Now we have a little bit more of a glimpse as to why his wife really left him. He does things that are illegal. He makes a comment when John Doe is almost captured, poses as a photographer. Mills makes the comment, I hate it when the press does that. The comment that follows almost reveals what's going on here, right?
Oh, they paid good money for,
Yeah, cops are on the take. Right? People in the press pay, and they pay well. Whoops, didn't mean that. Strike that. Forget I said that. He doesn't say that. I'm saying. Here's the teaching point. This is the reason why we went down this rabbit hole, because it's actually to serve a very, very, very important clinical pearl. Right? When we think of the antisocial personality disorder, we think of John Doe. That's the textbook. That's the narcissistic serial killer. That's the way Hollywood portrays it. That's what we think, because we love these Hollywood movies. And John Doe is not the only character that personifies the role of the narcissistic serial killer. But in real life, the individual that you, as a physician, will need to monitor for, assess for, and diagnose with the antisocial personality is the person who meshes in. Right? How many times have you heard heinous crimes being uncovered, bodies being dug up in basements where the neighbor just shrugs and says, I can't believe this, not in our town. He's such a good boy, quiet to himself. Too many times. The antisocial personality presents looking like you or me. And of all the irony, that dialogue is actually captured in yet another Brad Pitt film called Fight Club. Right? When a group of terrorists, domestic terrorists, actually get to a police officer. They threaten his life. And they say, if you ever tell anybody, we'll know. Right? I'm going to paraphrase. Right? We're your mailmen. We're your bus drivers. Right? We mesh in. We blend in. Right? So pulling from Fight Club, different characters, same actor. Applying it here, that's your teaching point. People, or I should say antisocial personality disorder individuals, will present to you looking much more like Somerset than looking like John Doe. And if you uncover the fatal flaw in this movie, I really think that the subversive plot actually shows that. By the way, there's a movie called Solace that was originally scripted to be the sequel to Se7en, but because they couldn't sign Morgan Freeman and instead hired Anthony Hopkins to play the role, they still went forward with production, and it certainly wasn't marketed as Se7en Part 2. Took a different name, and they created a different character. But a lot of the script remained the same. That script certainly does support this conspiracy theory. Because we follow the person supposed to be Detective Somerset into retirement. It's really not a restful retirement, or again, your stereotypical retirement that you would think. I'll leave it at that. I would give it a 5 with regard to watching. If you're interested and now really have to watch it, go right ahead, otherwise I wouldn't recommend it.